But first, let's get more details on the developments in Egypt. Now, the streets of Cairo were empty hours before the start of the imposed curfew. A daily curfew will be in place daily for at least 1 month as part of the emergency measures. And this comes as clashes continued to spread in Egypt after security forces' decisive move to evacuate pro-Morsi sit-ins. Adel El-Mahroui takes us through the first hour to the curfew.
The streets of Cairo are empty. Even before the curfew begins, people are afraid to go out in the city that never sleeps.
People are afraid of what is going on. What we see on television is terrifying. When you see someone holding a machine and killing people, it would make you scared. This is the fate of our country. That is why we are frightened.
Even those who are in the streets are in a rush to go home before the curfew starts. They have experienced a curfew before when Mubarak was ousted. But this time they know it's different.
We know the curfew is to control this situation that is getting out of hands. This is a security breach on all levels. Today, all the employees in our company left early. Also, this is the beginning of the curfew, so many were surprised, but we'll get used to it.
There is no security for the soldier himself. So what about us regular citizens? We are terrified of that.
No transportation, no one to buy food. The difference about this particular curfew is that people realized that it probably means more bloodshed. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Well, let's get the very latest from Egypt at this hour. We are joined by CCTV's Adel Mahroui. He joins us live from the capital, Cairo. Adel, can you give us an update on the developments after the raid on pro-Morsi camps?
Well, yesterday night and through until early this morning, there was a tight control from the armed forces over the streets. There was a curfew 2 years ago, but never has been so strict. People used to break the curfew. They used to take pictures beside the army tanks, and army troops would allow them to pass by. However, yesterday no one was allowed to cross the streets unless he was a medical doctor or a media person, and even those, they would not pass easily. But so far during the night, it was quite calm. Early in the morning, riots began once again in several cities, particularly in Upper Egypt, where there is a big mass of pro-Morsi supporters and where most of the clashes were sectarian violence, as some of these protesters had rushed into churches and set at least 9 of them on fire.
All right, Adel, the night was quite calm, as you report there, but there are reports that pro-Morsi supporters might be heading back onto the streets in spite of that state of emergency imposed. How likely is this to happen, and what would be the implication?
Well, it is actually happening as we speak. There are several rallies in Upper Egypt. Pro-Morsi protesters or supporters, they have blocked highways leading to several cities. There are some cities that all their entrances are blocked by these protesters. So this is only the beginning. There are also rallies planned even tonight to break the curfew by the Muslim Brotherhood. So there is a sense of challenge by the Islamic streams and their supporters to the army curfew. They believe this is part of what they have been fearing since President Mohamed Morsi was ousted, and this is an entire army rule. During night, the armed forces are the main controllers of the traffic in Egypt, and therefore they have the upper hand. And with the imposition of an emergency state, the armed forces also now have the power to arrest. So it means that they can arrest anyone without any judicial order or a prosecution warrant. So it gives them a complete authority over the streets. But the pro-Morsi supporters, they say they're not afraid and they will continue.
All right, Adel Mahroui joining us there live from Cairo. Indeed, the world's attention is now on Egypt following the clashes between security forces and supporters of the deposed Islamic President Mohamed Morsi. From the United Nations to the Arab world, leaders are condemning the actions taken by the military, and thousands are taking to the streets in support of peace and stability in Egypt. CCTV's Maria Galang with more.
World leaders come out to strongly condemn Egyptian authorities for using armored vehicles and bulldozers to clear 2 sprawling encampments of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi on Wednesday.
Just days ago, the Secretary General renewed his call for all sides in Egypt to reconsider their actions in light of new political realities and the imperative to prevent further loss of life. The Secretary General regrets that Egyptian authorities chose instead to use force to respond to the ongoing demonstrations.
The world is watching what is happening in Cairo. We urge the government of Egypt and all parties in Egypt to refrain from violence and resolve their differences peacefully.
Across the Arab world, too, protesters took to the streets, demonstrating against the violence in Egypt. Demands were made asking the interim government to step down in order for peace to return. From Tunisia, the birthplace of the Arab uprising, to the Gaza Strip.
Our message from here is that the bloodshed should be stopped, political life and democracy should return to normal, and the military coup should be ended as soon as possible.
To Turkey.
The whole world stands up for a seal or a will, but they are silent while thousands of people are being killed there in Egypt.
3,000 people protested outside the Egyptian embassy in Jordan's capital. Deputy leader of Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood, Zaki Bani, put the blame squarely on those who deposed Morsi.
These ruling forces that committed a violent and monstrous crime today will be noted in the world's history, and their actions will not be forgotten.
Over 100 people were killed in the clashes, and Egyptian Vice President Mohamed El Baradei has resigned in protest over the assaults. The military-backed leadership imposed a month-long state of emergency and nighttime curfew in Cairo. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Well, we are covering reactions from across the continent on the developments in Egypt. And for more reactions now, let's cross over to our correspondent Guy Henderson in Johannesburg and Rowie Rattenberg in Tunisia's capital, Tunis. Guy, first to you, what other reactions have come out from the rest of Africa?
Well, we've had strong reactions right across the world, of course. The United States, several European countries and the European Union, as well as many of Egypt's neighbours as well, quite strongly criticising this violence. In terms of reaction from the African Union, we haven't had an official statement yet, but I've spoken to the South African Foreign Ministry. Their spokesman has confirmed that they are now finalising the wording of an official statement, which we can expect later in the day, which is likely to reflect the views of the African Union. The South African Foreign Ministry have already taken to the social networking site Twitter to officially give their condemnation of this violence. And I think that probably is likely to be a similar tone that we'll hear from the African Union, given that the AU were strongly critical of that initial military takeover, the removal of President Mohamed Morsi back in late July. In terms of the options going forward and any more substantial action, well, there are actually only limited tools that regional actors can use. The AU has the option, of course, of extending Egypt's suspension, and it probably is likely to do that. It doesn't, of course, use sanctions. It doesn't agree with the concept of using sanctions. Individual African countries do have the option of withdrawing their ambassadors. South Africa's ambassador, we understand, is actually out of the country at the moment, though that is a personal visit. Beyond that, of course, there is the more medium-term options of mediation and trying to engage some of the key stakeholders in this very polarised dispute. There has been an AU team which has, on several occasions, been spending time in Egypt and trying to engage with those actors. They may be able to re-enter the country and try and get some sort of dialogue going. But in the short term, really, the only option, the only immediate option is for them to, for these African countries, for the AU, for regional bodies, to call for restraint and try and hope that that can put some pressure as the death toll now stands at 465 people.
All right. Rowie, to you in Tunis there. Tunisia is much closer to Egypt and the birthplace of the Arab uprising. How have the latest developments in Egypt been received there in Tunisia, especially since it is looking like Tunisia is currently going through a political crisis of its own?
Indeed, and here Tunisia is ruled by a coalition that is led by the Muslim Brotherhood, the group Ennahda, and I just want to bring you up to date. In the last few minutes, we heard from the leader of Ennahda speaking here in Tunis, not too far away at a hotel, giving a press conference to journalists. Rashid Ghannouchi, I want to share some of his comments with you. He said the revolutions of the Arab Spring, his words, are facing a fierce war, specifically talking about what's going on in Egypt. He said the coup in Egypt has revealed its truth. He says that is a military governance under the disguise of democracy. And perhaps some words to the people of Tunisia who are listening. He said the Egyptian lesson should strengthen unity in Tunisia. He admitted that his government under his party's leadership has made mistakes, but he said that these mistakes should not justify a coup nor the suspension of dialogue. Now, Tunisia has been, of course, in a political stalemate for the last few weeks following the assassination, the latest assassination of a secular opposition politician. Many people here are calling for the suspension of the National Constituent Assembly, which was meant to schedule the dates for an election and actually create a constitution. That dialogue now has stopped, and some people suspected that or feared that Tunisian secular opponents would be inspired by what's happened in Egypt. But it is important to remember that the structures here are quite different. Indeed, the Arab uprisings began here in Tunisia. They elected members of the Muslim Brotherhood, the ruling party here, but they are quite different. They were in exile, for example, Rashid Ghannouchi in London for 22 years. So it's a little bit difficult to draw parallels between Tunisia and Egypt, especially the role of the military here, much smaller military, people here having a different connection to the military. But of course, both sides watching closely, and some very strong comments and warning coming from Ennahda here today.
All right, Rowie Rattenberg joining us there from Tunis, and Guy Henderson in Johannesburg. Thank you to you both. Well, let's return briefly again to Cairo there and for some more analysis about the developing situation in Egypt at the moment. We're joined live in our Cairo studio by Mr. Walid Batouti, who is a board member of the Political Coalition for International Guides Syndicate. Mr. Batouti, thank you very much for joining us here on Africa Live. Now, hundreds of people are dead. Could this have been avoided?
Yes, it could have been avoided from the very beginning if the brotherhoods would have listened to reason from the very beginning. So, and you may have noticed I did not call them Muslim Brotherhoods because there is a very big campaign in Egypt now, and we just called them the Brotherhoods. Yesterday, when the crack happened, it was not peaceful. They had ammunition. Don't forget. There is over 50 police officers and soldiers. They've been shot dead, and a large number of the people were dead were civilian, and not even with the brotherhoods. There were people walking. They were shooting just down the streets. So you will find that the large number of the people dead, it was from their hand. Their hand is full of blood. Bearing in mind another thing which is very important, last night after the curfew, they discovered 22, and that's the first round, they discovered 22 bodies under the stage of Rab'a. So where is peaceful? So I think it would have been avoided if the brotherhoods from the very beginning would have listened to reason.
All right, Mr. Batouti, now it's been protest after protest over the last 2 years or so. The country has remained unstable for almost 2 years now. How can Egypt, though, get out of this situation? What is the way forward here?
Well, you will see now that all the Egyptians are backing up the Egyptian army, the government, the police, and everybody they want stability. The Egyptians are very tired of all this protest and demonstration. And finally, after 1 year, the Egyptians now, and especially with what happened yesterday, all the Egyptians started to realize the fact what happened on the 28th of Jan, 2011. Now we know who did everything. From burning churches yesterday, I see no comment from the White House or Obama or the Human Rights Organization. I'm sorry, CNN and Al Jazeera, they're feeding a bunch of lies. That's not true.
All right.
And on the other hand, Egypt, all the Egyptians now, we've all agreed we want to stand on our feet. We want to get our country back. We want to get our economy back. and we want a liberal country, and they have gone out of the wrong way, so we're just trying to straighten everything back, and I think everybody in Egypt right now is after stability. We want to build our economy, we want tourism back, and this will happen very soon once we have security on the streets.
All right, Mr. Walid Batuti, a board member of the Political Coalition for International Guide Syndicate, joining us there live from Cairo. Thank you. Now, we'll take a short break here on Africa Live, but when we return, stability at risk. We focus on the deteriorating situation in Tunisia. We remain in the Arab North for the moment, and the political turmoil in Tunisia, where some argue that it threatens the country's democratic transition. And many are left wondering how things turned around so quickly. CCTV's Rowie Rattenberg explains.
January 24th, 2011. Tunisia's ruler of over 2 decades, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, buckles to popular protest and flees the country. Demonstrations turn to celebrations. 9 months later, October 23rd, Tunisians vote in an historic election for a national constituent assembly. A coalition emerges led by Islamists, Ennahda, but backed by 2 secular parties, a compromise that is praised. The assembly is given 1 year to write a constitution and hold new elections. Fast forward nearly 2 years, and neither has happened, and things now look dimmer than ever. 2 prominent secular opposition figures have been shot dead, one just weeks ago. It appears using the same weapon. At their funerals, many Tunisians felt a part of their country's future died with them.
The protesters behind me have been here in front of the National Assembly since that latest assassination. And that's when secular members of the assembly pulled out, refusing to work with the ruling Islamist party. The Speaker of the Assembly himself, a secular politician, has halted proceedings, and that's where things stand today.
What was wrong is that the Islamists promises a lot and were not able to deliver. And they were suspected of having a hidden agenda, and they confirmed people of this suspicion.
The protesters say the government and assembly have blood on their hands. 32-year-old Osama Mrasi has been at every major demonstration since the fall of Ben Ali.
Ennahda and their partners have stolen this revolution and have not fulfilled any of the Tunisian youth's demands.
The government says it needs more time and notes the vocal tensions are proof the system is working. Negotiations are underway to resolve the political impasse, and for now the streets are calm, despite the growing public divisions. But with both sides holding firm on what needs to be done, it seems history will tell if Tunisia gets it right. Rowie Rattenberg, CCTV in Tunis.
Well, let's now take a look at other stories we are following for you at this hour. Benin's President Boni Yaye has named a new cabinet just a few days after he dissolved his entire government. The 26-member team is composed of 13 new members and 13 others who will serve under the old government. According to reports, the team includes no members from the opposition side. The post of Prime Minister is also said to have been eliminated. Elsewhere, the United Nations Special Representative for the Central African Republic says the overall situation in that country remains highly volatile. Lieutenant General Babacar Gaye told the Security Council that the situation in the Central African Republic is unpredictable and that it runs the risk of descending into anarchy and chaos. The United Nations Head of Humanitarian Affairs Valerie Amos also stressed that the CAR authorities must do more to protect civilians, including releasing and reintegrating children associated with armed groups. Finally, vigilante groups armed with machetes and clubs have begun appearing in Nigeria's northeast, setting up roadblocks, searching people and vehicles, and arresting suspected members of the Boko Haram militant group. Now, most of the thousands of suspected members of the Boko Haram arrested in Maiduguri have been discovered by these young volunteers who call themselves the civilian JTF. The name is fashioned after the military joint task force sent to enforce a 3-month-old state of emergency and hunt the extremists down. We'll now shift gears and turn to our business news, our top story.